Hello. Welcome to my Addams Family Values any percent speedrun in 4906. If you prefer to watch this run without me blathering over the top of it the whole time, I've linked an uncommented version of this run in the description. I have done some commentated runs of this game in the past, the best of which is probably my run for SNES Superstars 2016, which is also linked in the description. Much of the general process of rooting and running this game is covered in that run and is largely unchanged from then until now. For insight into the actual gameplay and why I'm doing the things I'm doing to progress through the game, I recommend referring back to that prior run. The main thing I want to cover with this commentary is to explain what all has changed in the years since. In that prior run, I used the shockwave item in combination with the red potion to glitch the game in such a way that an inaccessible debug feature known as walk-through walls becomes activated. Using walk-through walls, I would waltz through the rest of the game unopposed and trigger the ending in the normal way. Since then, I've discovered a way to leverage that same glitch to activate the credits immediately, as well as a method of activating the glitch with only the shockwave, no longer requiring a lengthy detour to also obtain the red potion. Special shoutouts to Mr. Cheese for helping me to understand how this glitch operates. Aside from the changes involving the main glitch at the end of the run, there has been one other route change that I want to get out of the way first. Back when we would use walk-through walls to reach the ending of the game in the normal way, it was worth it to obtain the Slimming Potion item, which can be used to open a shortcut known as the Trans-Mansion Express, which is a series of warp points that connect the Western Swamp and Eastern Swamp with an area known as the Stone Gardens. The Stone Gardens used to need to be completed in order to obtain a key to unlock the entrance to the final dungeon. It was faster to wait to complete the Stone Gardens until after walkthrough walls had been activated, as several items that would normally be required to complete the area can be bypassed. In the Western Swamp, a large NPC is stuck inside the tunnel and is blocking access into the warp until you give him the Slimming Potion so that he can become smaller and move out of the way. At the same time that this access to the Western Trans-Mansion Express is opened, the access in the Eastern Swamp simultaneously opens. With walkthrough walls, the Slimming Potion is not actually needed to access the warp in the Western Swamp, as the warp is still functional while the NPC is blocking it. However, the access in the Eastern Swamp is not functional until the NPC has been moved. It was because the Eastern Swamp access is closer of the two access points to where walk-through walls would be activated that it was worth it to obtain the Slimming Potion item and turn it into that NPC. Now that we'll be activating the credits immediately, we have no reason to ever visit the Stone Gardens, so the shortcut is not worth opening, so the Slimming Potion will be skipped. Unfortunately, the Slimming Potion skipping it has a serious drawback. You obtain the Slimming Potion from Granny, who at that same time refills your inventory of cookies. In this run, we only encounter two types of cookies: black beetle cookies, which are white, that fully restore your health when used, and crusty cookies that are blue, that make you invincible for a short time. And you can hold two of each type. Without detouring for the Slimming Potion, our last and only cookie refill will be the two of each type of cookie that we obtained from Granny just prior to heading toward Dungeon 3. Cookies are extremely useful for surviving this game's highly erratic enemies and for quickly dispatching the game's various bosses. In this game, your main lightning attack becomes weaker the more damage you take. Your lightning is blue and has maximum range and does maximum damage only when you're at full health. If you take a single hit, the lightning becomes green, while the range reduces to 2/3 and the damage reduces to 3/4. Below half health, the lightning is red, the range is reduced to 1/3, and the damage becomes only half. A key strategy for fighting bosses is then to refill your health to maximum using a white cookie, so that your attack does max damage, and then use a blue cookie to become invincible in order to continue dealing maximum damage for longer. With so few cookies at my disposal, I needed to rethink how cookies would be routed. So I have two of each type of cookie available, and I used to have two more of each type that I now have to cut from the route. I used my first white cookie to heal prior to the boss of Dungeon 3. I hope to dodge her attacks enough that I can get in plenty of damage while still having blue lightning. I used to also use 2 blue cookies on this fight to stay at full health for the full duration. But upon reflection, it was probably not faster to take the time to equip and eat the second of those blue cookies. I used to use a cookie to heal immediately prior to getting the slimming potion cookie refill, in order to survive the lengthy segment between the end of Dungeon 3 and the boss of Dungeon 5. I usually replace this heal with a 30 or so second detour to talk to Morticia. I give the rattle to her, and she rewards me with a health upgrade, which also refills my health. It's possible to skip this detour, and I have done so and saved time on previous attempts, but you have to play so much safer to avoid damage that it can easily end up being slower overall. I used my first blue cookie to take damage against the boss of Dungeon 5 and hopefully kill it before it can kill me. I used to use a white cookie before the fight to heal to increase my damage output, which would ensure that I could simply just stand in the corner and tank hits and still win every time. In this run, I would prefer to reach the boss while at full health so I can use that same strategy, but often I'm not able to do so. If I don't have full health, what I do is hide from the boss around a corner and hope the extra hits I get in before the boss figures out how to get around the corner are enough to make up the difference. In order to obtain the red potion, I used to have to fight the boss of the morgue. The boss can be dispatched very quickly using the infinite shockwave glitch, which requires 1 of each type of cookie to activate. Since I'm skipping the red potion, I no longer need to fight that boss. However, the methods of activating the credit sword glitch without the red potion coincidentally also require 1 of each type of cookie. So that's all the cookies accounted for. All things considered, skipping the slimming potion does make the run a lot harder, but if things go well, we can expect to save about a minute. Now let's think back to SNES Superstars 2016, where I used the big glitch to activate walk through walls and explain how the version of the glitch seen in that run works. First, you need to understand the way that continue points work in this game. They're regions of ground that, when you touch them, update your continue location to that spot. They exist in front of most dungeon entrances, as well as a couple other places. They're not tied to the entrances themselves, they're just invisible regions of ground that silently activate when touched. This game saves all progress with your continue point, including all flags set, and even the amount of health that you currently have. If you die and continue, all progress is reset to exactly how it was when you touched the continue point. Except, not quite. I'm guessing maybe the developers encountered a problem where saving all continue point data on every single frame that you're touching the continue point maybe caused some noticeable lag. So instead of saving the data right away, they waited to save it until the next screen transition. So if you touch a continue point, your continue location is immediately updated, but the saving of all of the progress waits until the next transition. Maybe that sounds reasonable until you actually think for a second about the possible consequences. Casual players are 100% going to get soft-locked, and I know this because prior to speedrunning this game, it happened to me. I had died after exiting a dungeon, but before reaching the next screen transition. When I respawned, I noticed that the amount of health that I had seemed incorrect, but I didn't think much of it at first. Hours of progress later, I'm trying to return to the beginning areas of the game in order to retrieve a password to save my progress when I encounter a staircase, or rather, a lack of a staircase that I had spawned earlier but was now mysteriously absent. This was because my continued location had been updated to past the staircase, but the spawning of that staircase itself was never saved, and so I was stuck. I investigated after my casual playthrough how this glitch worked, and one thing led to another, and now here we are. Anyway, this is where the red potion comes in. The red potion is a troll item where all it does is damages you for 1.5 skulls when you try to use it. You can move around while the damage is being taken, and there's a bit of an awkward interaction if you touch a screen transition while that's happening. The screen transition is stored and will occur, but it waits for you to finish taking damage before doing so. Even if you take damage to 0 remaining health, the screen transition still occurs, and then you will immediately die upon arriving in the new area. If you touch a continue point before doing this, you can save a continue point with 0 HP. When you select to continue, you respawn with 0 health and can continue to play like nothing's amiss, as the game is only programmed to be able to kill you when you take damage down to 0. If you take damage in the 0 HP state, your health underflows. Despite your health normally only being able to go as high as 14 skulls, for some reason it's stored as a 2 byte value. So now you have 32,767.5 skulls. From here, the game is going to be experiencing some difficulty in actually displaying your new health amount. When you take damage, only the graphics for the highest skulls are updated. So nothing too interesting happens if you just stand around taking damage all day. The game gets pretty confused about where exactly on screen it's supposed to be writing these skulls, and so the graphics of the game, piece by piece, slowly get replaced by skulls, which is funny looking but not particularly useful for the speedrun. If you go through a major area transition, the game attempts to do a full refresh of the health display, and with this much health it does not succeed and crashes. I still haven't found any way of leveraging this type of crash into doing anything useful, but on the other hand, with the shockwave item, we might be able to make something happen. The shockwave item can only be used if your current health is equal to your maximum health, and it allows you to pay half of your health to do huge damage to all on-screen enemies. As an aside, there's a nifty glitch called the infinite shockwave glitch, where you can deal huge damage to enemies without having to pay the health cost. If you're still blinking from having just taken damage, you won't lose health from using the shockwave. And then, using the shockwave also sets you blinking from taking damage, so you can just keep using it and using it. You do need to be at full health to use the shockwave, so you'll typically first use a white cookie to heal, then also use a blue cookie so you can take damage from something without having your health be reduced below full. But for the purposes of the crazy glitch that we've been working toward, it's that effect to cut your health in half that we're interested in. One problem. The shockwave can only be used when your current health is exactly equal to your maximum health. Having more health than your maximum doesn't count. It needs to be exactly equal. So now we have to discuss a glitch with the way that full health restores work in this game. When you trigger a full health restore, you see your health on screen slowly refill back to max, but you immediately regain the use of your blue lightning, as if your health was full, even before the refill has visibly completed. Now you might expect that to have been implemented in a way where maybe you have your actual current health and the currently displayed health, and whenever the two don't agree, your health that is displayed is slowly adjusted till it reaches the true value. That would make sense. That's not what the developers did. Instead, they simulated you having full health right away by setting your maximum health equal to your current health, and then using your actual maximum health as the loop counter until it returns back up to the true maximum value. Maybe that sounds reasonable until you think for a second about the possible consequences. One dumb thing that you can do is reduce your maximum health below the normal minimum of 3 skulls. If you want, get your health fully restored, and then immediately trip a screen transition to save that continue point while your health is still very low. When you load that continue point, your maximum health will be permanently reduced to what it was when you saved it, rounded down to the nearest whole skull. Actually, if you saved the continue point at half a skull, when you try to load the continue point with 0 maximum health, the code that displays your health on load never expected you to not actually have any health to display, so it misses its end check and loops the whole way around, attempting to display empty skulls at every step, crashing the game for much the same reason as when you would attempt to load a major area transition while having too much health. This particular crash can be performed in about 20 minutes, so it could have made for a faster run if it had turned out to be able to be manipulated into doing something useful. There's also a power-up in this game that sets your current health equal to 15 skulls, which is more than the maximum you can normally carry. If you want to keep that amount of health permanently, all you have to do is pick up a full restore power-up. You can't actually use a white cookie when your health is at maximum or greater, but full restore power-ups can still be collected. Even though no health needs to be restored. That first step of setting your maximum health equal to your current health is still performed. And it's that same mechanism that we will use to convert our glitched HP into a glitched maximum HP as well, allowing us to actually use the shockwave. So what happens when we try to cut our health in half when we have so much of it? The game keeps a queue of something, let's just say the graphical updates, that need to be performed on each frame. When you have your health, all of those skulls attempt to update all in the same frame, and it's too many updates for the game to handle at once. The queue overflows, and it starts overwriting whatever happens to be stored in memory after it. One thing in the blast zone that's overwritten is an address that, when it's set to something other than 0, enables walk through walls. But you don't actually get to walk through walls just yet because the game is surely going to crash. What often happens when the game crashes is that it resets the game completely. Back to the copyright screen, the game reinitializes memory, including stopping the music, clearing our continue point, and zeroing the walk through walls address. But sometimes we can cause something more useful to happen. Our primary means of manipulating the result of this glitch is by varying the amount of health that we have when the shockwave is used. By taking 2 or 3 hits from the enemies before picking up the full restore, the game still resets back to the copyright screen, but something is different. The music keeps playing, we can still load our continue point, and after loading back into the game, walk through walls is still active. What's happened is that, in this case, the game has not actually crashed. It looked similar at first because it also ended up on the copyright screen, but what's actually happened is that rather than resetting back to the start of ROM after a crash, we've jumped code execution to near the start of ROM, but since it's not the very start that we've jumped to, we've avoided that RAM reinitialization that would normally occur that wipes our continue point and undoes our ability to walk through walls. A side effect of this glitch was that numerous sprites would be replaced by random blobs of pixels. Waltzing through the game unaffected by everything while random blobs of pixels dance around was a pretty funny end to a run, and I was a little sad to see it go, but you can't stop progress. Again, if you want to see the run from SNES Superstars 2016 that does what I've just described, I've linked it in the description. But it turns out the shockwave is able to crash the game all on its own, without the need of the red potion. If you try to use it while your maximum health is less than 1 full skull, the code that cuts your health in half assumes some amount of halving needs to occur, so it also misses its end check, and loops the whole way around, attempting to display those skulls at every step. It's functionally the same as if you had very slightly more health than the actual maximum possible value the address could hold. And this can be done very easily. Damage down to half a skull, pick up a full restore power-up to set your maximum health also to half a skull, and use the shockwave immediately before any health actually restores. Unfortunately, the way the resulting crash shakes out with this amount of health is that nothing important passes through any addresses that we have any significant ability to manipulate, and so the game will just crash uselessly every time. This part's just an anecdote, but the shockwave is not the only thing in the game that can cut your HP in half. In the second to last room of the game, the same NPC that gave you the red potion offers you another troll item known as the black egg. When you touch the black egg, it blows up and deals half damage to you. On my first ever playthrough of this game as a kid, I was maybe 11 at the time, I had made it to the end of the final area with only half a skull remaining and no other resources to my name. I knew the egg was a troll, but I figured I was as good as dead anyway, so I touched it just to see what would happen. The game played a laugh sound effect, as crashes in this game sometimes do, and then crashed back to the copyright screen. Kid me was actually really pissed, so the punishment for touching the egg was so harsh. I had to re-enter my password, walk the whole way back to the final area. Later, I fumbled my movement through that second last screen and touched the black egg accidentally, and I braced for another reset, but it just did me some damage. So I figured what had happened previously had to have been a glitch. A couple years ago, when I thought to test picking up the black egg at low HP, as the game crashed, I had a huge deja vu moment when the memories of my first playthrough came flooding back. Anyway, using the shockwave with half a skull seemed like a bit of a dead end, but there's actually another angle. I said before that the amount of HP that you have is the primary means of manipulating the result, but really it's about the amount of graphic updates that are going into the queue. If there's anything else that gets added to the queue on the same frame that you use the shockwave, as long as it goes in before the health update attempts to be processed, we can push the health update a little farther down the queue and get a different result. One thing that gets added to the queue before health changes are changes to the map that occur when you press a switch. Unfortunately, pressing a switch on the same frame that you use the shockwave while having 1 HP is impossible because there are no full restore power-ups close enough to switches that you could use the shockwave before the full restore is able to restore any health. On the first frame after most screen transitions, however, there is another update that goes into the queue before health does. The amount of updates that occur varies depending on the screen transitions that's used, but unfortunately this can't really be used either, as again there are no full restore power-ups near enough to any screen transitions. But what if we can work out a method that doesn't need a full restore power-up? Maybe it can be done in more places if we can just use a white cookie. The trouble with using a white cookie for this task is that Fester has a little animation where he eats the cookie, during which you'll have no control. Before this animation can end, the health restore has already begun, so it's too late to be able to use the shockwave to blow up the game. We can end this cookie animation early if we just take damage. Taking damage while having half a skull is just going to kill us. So we'll need to eat a blue cookie first in order to survive the hit. Unfortunately, we also have no control for a short time after taking damage, and by the time we regain control, it's still too late to use the shockwave. To regain control right away, what we'll need to do is take damage immediately into a screen transition, which cancels the damage animation while keeping the health restore paused. Some types of screen transitions won't work for this purpose, for one reason or another, but most do. To recap, we need the damage down to half a skull. Then we use a blue cookie so that we can take damage without dying. Then we use a white cookie immediately before taking damage, and this damage boosts us immediately into a screen transition. When we arrive from the screen transition, we can't use the shockwave on the first possible frame, because it's not currently equipped. We just used a cookie. We need to pause and equip the shockwave, then go back through the transition. All of this back and forth through the screen transition is occurring in the few frames after eating a white cookie before any health actually gets restored. We only have a few frames to spare, so if the white cookie is used too early, or if the pause to equip the shockwave occurs too late, we could easily run out of frames. And then, of course, the final input to use the shockwave is always going to be frame perfect, since it needs to occur on the same frame that those other updates are going into the queue. All told, this is a very finicky glitch with multiple precise inputs, culminating in one final frame perfect input. But if we manage to pull all that off at once, you can get a crash to occur where something useful can be achieved without needing to take the time to acquire the red potion. It's difficult to find an enemy that can consistently damage us into a screen transition. Most of the enemies in this game have highly erratic RNG-based movement, but early in the game there are these plant enemies in the forests that you can usually count on to at least try to hit you. In a walk-through-walls route, walking all the way back to the forest is no big deal, since you're heading for the nearby Trans-Mansion Express anyway. But in the run you're seeing on screen, it's a pretty huge detour. It's just that I didn't want to increase the inconsistency of an already extremely difficult glitch by relying on enemy RNG on top of it all. So there's a potential improvement of a minute or two here for anybody crazy enough to devise and execute a new strategy that can be done somewhere closer to where the shockwave is obtained. Linked in the description is a crappy video where I show walk-through walls being activated without the red potion. At the time, I didn't understand how the glitch worked at all. I just found something that seemed to consistently work, though I had no idea why, and called it a strat. Interestingly, the game jumps directly to the title screen rather than to the copyright screen, which is a much rarer result. I wasn't sure if I wanted to grind out attempts of this difficult glitch when I knew there was probably more to discover, but at the time I had nothing better to do, so I set about doing a practice run. This practice run probably got what would have been the world record by at least a couple of minutes, but I know if I'd actually been timing or recording, there's no way my nerves will let me pull off that crazy glitch on the first try. I still can't actually believe that happened. Knowing I'd already sort of pulled off the crazy glitch, I guess killed what little motivation I had for actually trying to get a good time with that route. So instead, let's try to figure out what this glitch is really capable of. Until now, I've been glossing over how the game is working out exactly where code execution should jump to. We need to take a closer look at what exactly the glitch is overwriting. There's an address that the glitch overwrites that seems to be used for Fester's state. It's set to 1 when you have normal control, 3 when using the lightning, 4 when taking the damage, etc. This number is used as an index into a table of function pointers. What I mean is, say the value in the address is 4, it'll look at the 4th entry in this table, interpret what it finds there as a function it needs to jump code execution to. What do you think happens when the value stored there is larger than the number of entries in the table? It looks beyond the table to find some garbage data and goes ahead and jumps execution to wherever that garbage says it should jump to. Despite this address normally only going as high as 6, it's also stored as a 2-byte value. No matter how you set the glitch up, the lower of those 2 bytes always seems to be overwritten by a consistent value. However, we are able to vary the upper of the 2 bytes, and though the highest bit of that byte doesn't affect the result, that still leaves us with 128 different addresses that can be used as pointers to an address to jump to. Some of those pointers are completely useless. Some of them point toward interesting code that already exists in ROM. And a few point toward RAM addresses where we could potentially begin executing data as code. As well, a few of the pointers themselves are stored in RAM, so we might be able to manipulate them to point at something useful. The reason those other methods of crashing the game, either by loading a major area transition with way too much health, or by loading a continue point with 0 maximum health, don't seem to be able to be manipulated into doing anything useful, is because those crashes both occur during area transitions. During those transitions, Fester's state goes unused, so no jump is performed. We abuse the code that cuts your health in half instead because that's an action that we are able to perform during active gameplay. To determine what value will be written over the upper byte of Fester's state, the game is performing a table lookup to determine where on screen it's supposed to display the skull icon that it's currently processing. Of course, it's processing way more health than was ever intended, so this table lookup also returns some garbage data. It's possible that this garbage could be pulled from a RAM address that the player may be able to manipulate. It looks at 3 consecutive bytes where the 3rd byte is added to the result of using the first 2 bytes as an address to read a value from. The result of this addition is what's being written over Fester's state. There's one last little wrinkle. Before the glitch gets to overwriting Fester's state, it first overwrites one other important address that affects the result: your current health. Your health is being used as a loop counter for cutting your health in half, and so changing that value now will affect which skull it's trying to update later when it overwrites Fester's state. If the process that overwrites your current health goes through any addresses that the player might have control over, then that's another way that the final value that's written over Fester's state could potentially be affected. At the time of the jump, we are currently executing code from bank 80. The type of jump command that's being used is not one that is capable of jumping outside of the current bank. In this bank, there are quite a few memory addresses that are unused and not mapped to anything. When you try to read one of these addresses, what you get back is a copy of the last value that went through the system, or something. This stuff is above my pay grade. Who knows how much of it is accurate, but it doesn't matter. You're coming out of this with a gist, an understanding of the gist, okay? Anyway, in our case, when we attempt to use an unused address as a pointer, we keep getting back 8 zeros, which results in a jump to 808080. This address is located not far after the start of the game's code, which is located at 808000. And now we finally understand the copyright screen warp that we used in the original Walk-Through Walls route. We jumped back to just past the start of the game's code, avoiding the RAM reinitialization that would normally occur when the game resets after a crash. The fact that this result occurs whenever one of the many unused addresses is used as a pointer explains why the copyright screen warps were so prevalent and easy to stumble upon. The method used in the Walk-Through Walls route passed through no manipulable addresses, and so was completely consistent. And next I'll explain why the red potion skip method of activating Walk-Through Walls instead ended up directly on the title screen instead of the copyright screen. When you use the shockwave on the first possible frame after coming out of the staircase in that area of the forest, the address The addresses that determine what value is written over fester state happen to be located in RAM. What these addresses are normally used for seems to be something related to sound effects. I didn't understand how that region of memory worked at the time. To sidestep my lack of knowledge, what I would do instead is take an intentional death, which would zero these addresses, pointing them at address 0, and causing the value of address 0 to be the final result that's written over fester state. Address 0 seems to be a counter of some kind that increments through a loop of 16 possible values whenever any of several actions are taken. This value becomes unpredictable over time, but thankfully the aforementioned intentional death sets this counter to a particular value. With very careful play, after loading back into the game, we can get address 0 to be equal to whichever the possible 16 values we want. One of those values causes a pointer to be used that leads into a section of ROM that contains the title screen. And so that's how we ended up on the title screen with the red potion skip route. Once there, of course, we can boot back into the game, the walls no longer matter, and we can waltz through the rest of the game and into the credits. Now that we have a better grasp of how this whole glitch shakes out, maybe we can find a way to skip the formality of actually having to beat the game. Let's access those credits directly. Quick disclaimer. From here on out, we're diving into the particulars of the credits warp setups that I've used in real-time runs. But there are surely countless possible setups. These are not necessarily the fastest methods of jumping to the credits, but they were the easiest to find of the setups that I thought could reasonably be performed in real time. I also wanted to be able to perform the credits warp with a single controller. No multi-taps, clamping down buttons on multiple controllers, or whatever you might be familiar with from arbitrary code runs of other games. I discarded any leads that might lead me down that kind of path. If we're going to jump to the credits, we'll need to find a reasonable location in RAM that we're able to manipulate enough to encode an instruction to perform that credits jump. Let's first figure out what such an instruction would look like. The code that activates the credits begins around address 82FE32 and ends around 82FE97. About 60% of the addresses in that range can be jumped to, and we'll see the game successfully fall through into the credits. But this section of ROM is actually mapped into 4 different banks. In addition to bank 82, banks 02, 42, and C2 all map the credits at that same address, FE32. In banks 02 and 82, the credits are even mapped twice, so in addition to FE32, in those banks the credits also exist at 7E32. The SNES is little endian, meaning the least significant bytes are stored first, so we'll need the 3 bytes of the credits address to appear in reverse order somewhere in RAM. So, quick recap: to successfully encode the address of the credits somewhere in RAM, we will need 3 bytes in a row where we can achieve these particular values. First, one of the 60% or so of values that work between 32 and 97. Second, FE, or in some cases 7E, will work. And third, we'll need 02, 42, 82, or C2. Since the section of ROM that activates the credits is not stored in the current bank 80, we must use a type of jump command that is able to leave the current bank. And there are 3 main opcodes that can be used to do this: 22, 5C, and DC. 22 and 5C for our purposes will work the same, simply jumping directly to the address specified by the 3 bytes to follow. The DC opcode is a different type of jump. It performs an indirect jump where it uses the 2 bytes that follow to look up a memory address in the current bank where the 3-byte address that you'd like to jump to is stored. These 2 types of jumps have their pros and cons. It's difficult to actually find 4 bytes all in a row that are flexible enough to perform the direct jump. So despite the indirect jump needing 3 bytes manipulated for the jump command and a further 3 bytes elsewhere for storing the RAM address to jump to, the fact that it's only ever 3 bytes needed in a row each time provides some much needed flexibility, and in the end it will be this type of indirect jump that we'll use. I searched all of the RAM addresses that I could jump to in hopes of finding the means to encode a jump to the credits. Many of the addresses that we can jump to just didn't have enough range of possible values to encode anything useful. Many of them showed a wide range of possible values, but unfortunately just changed too erratically to be able to reliably control precisely what values they hold. A handful showed promise, and credit swaps for some of them probably do exist, but again, they were made too difficult for real time by a limited range of possible values or by difficulty in coordinating all the addresses to precise values needed. Eventually, I settled on using a section of memory I'm guessing is a list of sound effects that have to be played. So if I find a quiet place and place sounds in just the right way, maybe there could be something there. So let's explain the types of values this section of memory can hold. There are a couple of sound effects that don't use the list, but most do. Every time one of the sound effects that uses the list play, 4 bytes are appended to the list. It's a pretty sizable list, and once the list is completely full, it goes back to overwriting entries from the beginning of the list, and whenever you load a new screen, it also resets back to the beginning of the list. Some sound effects aren't panned and always add the same 4 bytes to the list, no matter how they're played. For example, the lightning always adds 071F6440, or taking damage always adds 0730FF40. All of these sound effects of this type start with 07 and end with 40. Don't ask me what these values are actually used for because I have no idea. For sound effects that are panned, the first byte seems to be an identifier of sorts, with valued identifiers ranging between 86 and A7 depending on the sound effect that's played. The second byte is usually 00, and the third and fourth bytes of the pan sound effects are the horizontal and vertical pan of the sound effect, respectively, and the pan is relative to the top left corner of the screen's current position. The second byte is not always 0. If the sound effect plays from far enough off-screen horizontally, then it's used as the high byte of the horizontal pan. This game has a weird audio bug that can sometimes happen where a sound effect from off-screen plays at a way louder volume than it ought to. I wonder if this bug could be related to the fact that the horizontal pan has the second byte but the vertical pan doesn't. The range of values for the second byte are quite restrained since screens are never wider than 3 screen lengths. It's difficult to get a sound effect to play from a consistent position off-screen, so for our purposes, we'll never take advantage of this second byte's ability to sometimes be non-zero. And so that's what we have to work with. Using a pan sound effect, bytes 3 and 4 can be almost any value we want as long as we can stand at that position on screen. Some of the more extreme values can't be reached because you can't stand outside the edge of the screen, but that's not too limiting. Bytes 1 and 2 are mostly not able to be manipulated, and we have to make do with the few possible values available to us. So, let's try to make something out of it. Fester's sub-weapons, when used, all play the same pan sound effect. We have to pick up the Swamp Slime weapon to progress in the game anyway, so we'll be throwing that at different positions to write payloads. The first credits warp setup that I used in runs involved throwing the slime at horizontal position DC, in hopes of using that DC as an opcode for an indirect jump. If we play a non-pound sound effect next, then we can use most of the memory addresses in the range of 07XX as ranges of addresses to use as our pointer to jump to, with that XX portion of that depending on the vertical position of the slime throw. And it was searching through this range that I finally found a match. At 07BC are 2 bytes that are used to control the vertical component of how Fester slides on ice. Once you leave the ice, these values persist in memory until you exit the game or stand on ice again. By moving straight up off of ice, this address will read 80FE. After this address is one that stores what type of ground Fester is currently standing on. 0 is normal ground, 1 is ice, 2 is slow walk stairs. So if we then stand on stairs, we've done it. 02FE80 is an address that, when jumped to, will cause the credits to play. But there's a problem. There are no slow walk stairs near enough to any screen transitions to actually be able to use this method, unless we resort to using the red potion so that we can wait to use the shockwave until we're ready. At the time when I discovered this setup, requiring the red potion honestly suited me fine, since to perform the glitch without it was so difficult, and I was kind of hoping to find a marathon safe route anyway, so I set about doing runs with this strategy. There are just a few more particulars of the setup to go over. First thing we need is a screen that has everything we need to perform the glitch. Luckily, there's a screen that's very convenient to reach that has it all. A continue point, a screen transition, a full restore power-up, a damage source, ice, stairs. It's got it all. It's actually the screen that I was on when I first discovered walk-through walls. Unfortunately, it also has a solid wall at the position you would need to stand to throw the slime. No big deal. After you reach the final screen of the game, use the red potion to die as you re-enter the dungeon you just exited from. To save a continue point with 0 health, continue the game, then take 2 hits from the enemies, pick up the full restore, use the shockwave. Now we continue the game. Walk-through walls will be active, and we can stand at the required position to throw the slime. One of the possible values that you can write over Fester State always jumps to 01A9, which is part of this sound effect structure. But there's an interesting second way to begin executing code from there. One of the possible values for Fester State results in using the current width of the room we're in as a pointer to a location to jump to. There are 3 possible screen widths, either 1, 2, or 3 screens wide, and the width of a triple wide room is 01B0, which is just after that direct jump to 01A9. The screen where we're performing this glitch is indeed triple width, and so that gives us an additional option for jumping into the sound effect code that we're about to write. And it turns out this second option is more convenient, as you only need 5 uses of the red potion, or 15 total hits of damage, to reduce your health to an amount that will cause the correct value to be written over Fester State. This result for Fester State is actually one of the more common ones to get, as it's what happens when the table lookup to determine where it should try to write the skull onto the screen looks at unmapped memory. The place we'll be jumping into is quite a distance down the list of sound effects, so we'll need to play some additional sound effects in order to line up with where we will begin writing our payload. Taking damage so many times will get us part of the way there, but to quickly fill up the list the rest of the way, we will need to use the lightning attack a total of 17 times. We need to make sure the last of those sound effects that we play is the final hit of damage from the red potion, as this will actually include the first instructions we'll be executing. Jumping in at 01B0 will be aligned with the first of the 4 bytes of a sound effect, but to get DC as our opcode, we need to be aligned with the 3rd byte. We need to execute code to align ourselves with the 3rd byte of the sound effect without breaking anything. The sound effect identifier from throwing slime, which is 9A, will not work for this. 9A is a 1-byte instruction. And so opcode 00 will be executed next. 00 is the opcode for a break, which is something we don't want to be taking right now. Instead, taking damage causes us to execute 0730, harmless 2-byte instruction. Then the next instruction that we will execute is the second half of taking damage, with the first half of using the slime to form a harmless 4-byte instruction, FF 409A00, and now we're aligned. Alignment is another reason why coming in at 01B0 is more convenient than coming in at 01A9, because 01A9 would have us aligned with the 2nd byte of sound effects, and while that can be made to work, we have to jump through a few more hoops. Now, hopefully having committed a visual cue of the correct position to memory, stand there, throw the slime. Because of the way that movement works in this game, that can sometimes be easier said than done. It'd be very difficult if you had to hit the correct position both horizontally and vertically simultaneously, so ideally, you want to be able to find the correct position using only cardinal movement. The problem is that Fester's cardinal movement alternates between moving 1 pixel and moving 2 pixels on each frame, so it's possible that the necessary position will always be skipped over. I do a bit of a setup to ensure the correct position will always be reachable with only cardinal movement. The previous time that I loaded into the game, when going over to activate walk-through walls, I would make sure to hold up left as I spawned. This manipulates the respawn position for when I load back in with walk-through walls active, ensuring the correct position for throwing slime is always reachable, as long as I refrain from any diagonal movement. Finally, after throwing the slime, pick up the full restore power-up. That plays the non-panned sound effect that completes the payload, DC BC07, an indirect jump to a location determined by our last vertical interaction with ice and the current type of ground we're standing on. So then, walk straight up off the ice, stand on the stairs, use the shockwave, and the game will be complete. My best time with this route was 57:25, linked in the description. If you just want to see this method of crowd sort being executed, skip to around 55 minutes into the video. This method of credits warp is fairly easy to do, so you can probably try it at home if you want. Anyway, no more messing around. We've reached present day. It's time to go over the credits warp method that you're watching right now. Try as I might, I couldn't find a good way to manipulate the address of the credits to be anywhere reasonable in memory, at least not without being able to stand on stairs. I had to take matters into my own hands. The general plan is going to be this. Read from memory a value that forms half the address of the credits. Store that value next to a location in memory that already contains the other half of the address of the credits, forming the full credits address. Then we'll perform an indirect jump using this newly formed credits address. After considering my options, I've opted to perform the entire payload setup on the same forest screen while we'll be performing the glitch with the shockwave to activate said payload. Writing the full payload involves taking damage 3 times, so I must arrive at the forest with at least 2 full skulls. This area of the forest is also a triple wide screen, and again, for payload alignment reasons, we will be choosing to jump to 01B0. As before, we need to fill out the list of sound effects in order to line up our payload with where code execution actually jumps in, and to do this we will need to play a total of 31 sound effects, which we will do using the lightning and taking any remaining damage needed to get down to exactly 2 skulls remaining. We need to throw in 1 additional sound effect at the beginning of our payload for reasons that I will explain in a bit. You can use either lightning or damage for this, as both contain harmless instructions that will correctly align with what we want to do next, which is take the first required damage and align the opcode of the next instruction with the third byte of our first slime throw. The first of 4 slime throws will be at horizontal position AF, which is the opcode for loading a 2-byte value into the accumulator register from a 3-byte memory address. We complete this 3-byte address by having thrown the slime at vertical position C9 and by taking damage, which again adds 0730FF40 to the list. So the full address that we'll be loading from is 3007C9, and then the FF in taking damage will be our opcode for a harmless 4-byte instruction to align us for the next slime throw. The address we're loading from, 07C9, is mapped to the same memory location in most banks. And so for the 30 of the bank to load from is irrelevant in this case. 07C9 usually contains the value 02 followed by a C0. Sometimes this address contains other values, but during the key moment of executing the glitch, I have never seen it be set to any other value. It's the 02 that we're interested in using to form the address of the credits, but the C0 aspect of it does perform a useful function that I will explain in a bit. Now I want you to remember back to earlier when I said that using the shockwave on the first possible frame after coming out of a staircase in this area of the forest results in some RAM addresses being used to determine what value gets written over Fester state. And do you remember how I said that those addresses were normally used for something that was maybe related to sound effects? Well, it turns out it's here. Bytes 2 through 4 of the next slime throw will be used to determine what value gets written over Fester state. This is why we need to play an additional sound effect somewhere before now in the payload, because we needed to align it so that the value written to Fester state is determined by a slime throw. None of the non-pound sound effects can give the desired result. What we write here with the slime not only needs to result in a jump to this very same section of memory, it also needs to be able to be executed without messing up the results of the payload. I decided to throw slime at position 9FBD, which indeed results in the necessary values being written over Fester's state. The 9F opcode supposedly stores the accumulator to memory somewhere. I don't know where, doesn't matter. There were a few reasons for this position of the slime throw being chosen. First, 9F is a 4-byte instruction, which lines up code execution immediately for the next slime throw, with no need to go and take damage or something to connect the 2 slime throws together. The position that you need to stand for this throw is also pretty close by to the next position that we need to throw slime at, and also this instruction does not update the negative flag, which is something that we will sort of be important in a bit. The third slime throw will be performed at horizontal position 8D. This opcode stores the accumulator to memory at an address specified by the following 2 bytes. Standing at vertical position 8A and taking damage completes the instruction to stored address 07BA, which is only a few bytes from the vertical ice physics interaction that we used for the previous credits warp setup. In fact, we were writing over the horizontal component of that same ice interaction. Immediately prior to this are 2 bytes that seem to have something to do with vertical movement in general. If we were holding up on the control pad on the previous frame that we had control, those 2 bytes will be set to 80FE, which is interestingly the same value that we used to achieve with vertical ice movement by walking straight up off of the ice. As long as we remember to hold up when we go back through the staircase right before using the shockwave, we will achieve the bytes 80FE and 02 all in a row, which we can use to point to the credits. I could probably have found a setup that used the 4-byte store accumulator instruction in the same way that I used the 4-byte load accumulator instruction, but since I used the 3-byte store accumulator instead, I have to explain one last little quirk. We're going to have to execute the 2nd byte of taking damage as our opcode, 30, which is branch if negative. The following byte is the distance to jump to if the branch is taken, relative to where the program counter would be if the branch were not taken, and it's signed, so larger values will result in jumps that go backward. That byte is FF, which means if the branch were taken, code execution jumps backward 1 byte to execute that very same FF. Of course, FF, harmless 4-byte instruction that lines up us ready for our next slime throw. If the branch is not taken, the final byte of taking damage, 40, is executed, which is the opcode for return from interrupt, which is something that we're not interested in doing right now. So we need to ensure the branch is taken by making sure the negative flag actually is set. So that's why it was important that the previous slime throw didn't disturb the negative flag, and it's also why it was important that the 02 we loaded into the accumulator was attached to that C0. The C0 makes it so that the full value is interpreted as a negative number, making sure the negative flag does get set. And finally, we throw position at DCB8. DC, of course, is our indirect long jump opcode. We use the lightning one last time to complete the instruction, setting up address 07B8 as our pointer to an address to jump to. When the glitch is actually performed, as long as we remember to hold up on the control pad, that address will contain 80 and then FE and then 02. And then the 02 will have been written to the following byte by the previous instruction that we encoded. And of course, 02FE80 is an address from which the credits can be activated. Standing at all these precise positions is not as straightforward as you might like. I explained before how Fester alternates between moving 1 pixel and moving 2 pixels on each frame. Whether he moves 1 or 2 pixels is determined by his subpixels, which are almost never set to particular values. Even when something sets its position to a particular place, it still leaves the subpixels untouched. If you think walking into a wall will align you with it, bring you close to the wall, no. Your next movement, if it would bring you into a wall, you just stop in place. All of this can make it super frustrating to consistently find a precise position. I worked hard to make sure all of the required slime throws were in the bottom right corner of the screen. All of the other corners of the screen have obstacles that make them a lot more difficult to use. All of those times where we had to take damage, there is no suitable enemy below the staircase that we can use for this. We have to go up the stairs, take the damage, then come back down the stairs in order to find appropriate positions to throw the slime. Coming out of the staircase at least sets my full pixels to particular values. From there, I slide into the corner to the left and use some visual cues to judge if I've gotten all the way into the corner. If not, if necessary, I can sometimes do a small amount of diagonal movement to adjust my subpixels to get closer to the wall. The vertical position of the first slime throw is convenient because it can be achieved just by walking straight down into the bushes at the bottom of the screen. I only need to make sure my vertical subpixels are correct so that I'll stop as close to the bushes as possible. The horizontal position can be reached regardless of whether or not I was able to move fully into the corner. Slime throw positions 2 and 3 were chosen because they were both a multiple of 3 pixels away, both vertically and horizontally, from being fully lodged in the corner to the left of the stairs. You always move 3 pixels every 2 frames, regardless of subpixels. So positions multiples of 3 away can always be found. Because everything was a multiple of 3 apart, no additional position setup needed to be performed in between those 2 throws. And for the 4th slime throw, an annoying little setup involving going back through the staircase additional time had to be performed in order to ensure the subpixels were correct to find the position. The vertical position can usually be found automatically by brushing against the second lowest layer of bushes at the bottom of the screen, but sometimes the position setup in the corner to the left doesn't fully work, in which case you have to find the vertical position for the slime throw manually using another visual cue. Alright, no more beating around the bush. Let's talk through performing the crazy glitch. Lure an enemy over to the stairs, eat a blue cookie to become invincible, and then eat a white cookie to heal right before the enemy damages you into the staircase. If you get as close to the staircase as possible before taking damage, which depending on subpixels you might not be able to do, then you'll have a total of 3 extra frames where you could potentially be using the cookie too early or pausing to equip the shockwave too late. After equipping the shockwave, we go back through the transition, making sure to hold up on the control pad as it goes, and then finally we use the shockwave on the first possible frame, and good games, everyone. I hope you understand everything that I just said, because it's all going to be on the exam.